Everybody, welcome. Coming to you live on a Wednesday night this week for a change, but that is because our special guest tonight is literally busy jetting around the world, quite literally. Currently in Switzerland, just been in Greece, I think, so we'll find out. But it's a real treat that she's able to join us tonight. So welcome everybody to a Shelf Help Club author event where tonight, in support of Loneliness Awareness Week, we're going to be talking about loneliness and its opposite, connection. There we go, snap. So our guest tonight is Simone Heng, a human connection specialist, a sought after speaker, and the author of Let's Talk About Loneliness. And her work is all about helping people understand why we need human connection, and crucially, how we can do it better, because we need to. So welcome, Simone. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Toni, and reaching out. And thank you for reading the book. It means the world to me. And I hope it's helped. And I hope we can help more people demystify connection and loneliness tonight.
Yeah, demystify. I love that as a word. Because I was thinking, yeah, take away the stigma, take away the shame, but demystify is gorgeous. I love that. I've loved reading your book and learning about your story. And I feel like it's a real roller coaster of all different types of connection all over the world. So you've lived it all. So I feel like you're the person to talk to us.
I'm actually a vampire, Toni. I'm like 100 years old
I
and
feel like you
just,
might be. You've lived many lives.
yeah.
But you're also, I think, I love the definition you give of loneliness, which is the type and amount of human connection you desire versus the type and amount you're getting. And I feel like I want to start with that because it shows that it looks and feels different for everyone. So we can be surrounded by people, but maybe not the right people, or we can not have that one really intimate friendship or a romantic relationship that we're craving. So I think that's really important for our audience to kind of to know as well that it's going to there's not necessarily a rule book, but there are types of connection that we do all need.
Absolutely. I just want to lean into the fact that I didn't make that definition up. Like if you look at all the big researchers, and I sit on the board for this Foundation for Social Connection DC, and that is the approved kind of definition of it. So it's about that gap. It's about that perception between what you desire in terms of quality and amount of connection and the type and amount you might feel trapped in. I speak to a lot of women that can at times along different stages of their marriage and motherhood feel trapped. Or people like I was trapped in toxic family system and then trapped in toxic work system where you're being forced because you have to get a paycheck to swim in this pool of negatively polarized connection every single day. And if anything, that makes you feel lonelier because it augments the gap of like, this doesn't feel good in my nervous system. This doesn't feel fun or warm or safe in any way. And it just, if anything, is becoming untenable because my loneliness is
Mm.
yearning to feel safe, to feel in trust, to feel in authenticity with people around me.
Yeah. One amazing thing I learned from the book is that there'll be it might manifest in different ways, like things like your sleep and different things like that. So I'd love to talk about that as we go through. But just before we start, just so everybody knows, we've got maybe have some newbies here. So welcome everyone. Your cameras are off. No, your cameras can be on. We'd love to see your faces. People get shy until the end usually, but your mics are off. But please use the chat box to say hello and let us know where you are in the world. Maria's there, and she's going to be sharing some links for Simone's book and Instagram, and also a quiz, which is all about your social health, which we'll be talking about as well. So yeah, just put your cameras on and say hi if you feel like it as we go through. And just a reminder for any newbies that the Shelf Help Club is the world's first dedicated self-help book club and community, and we're all about celebrating self-help and supporting self-discovery as a way to create better relationships with ourselves, but also especially important tonight with others. So, Simone, let's just start with a little bit about you and learning more about your story and what you do. So, where are you today and what are you doing and what have you been doing for the last week or so?
So I have, for the last few weeks, been based here in Switzerland. When I was younger, I used to live in the German part of Switzerland here, but I actually am here for work. So I'm speaking for some Swiss financial institutions. And then at the same time, I've done a bit of travel around Europe and then working remotely from here. But my home base is Singapore. I also called, as you can hear probably from my accent, I grew up in Australia from the age of 3. And then I also lived in Dubai for 5 years and Singapore for a bit, bobs around that. And yeah, so I really consider myself to be a global citizen, and I think that's what makes the book really rich as well. So
Yeah.
if any of you have felt the lack of belonging or loneliness of living away from your family circle, we really speak into that in the book.
Yeah, I think there's a chapter on about the expat
Yeah.
way of because you're having to connect very quickly, aren't you, with people, and you
Yes.
might not be there for a long time, so it's that kind of quite fluid, but also how do you get the deep connections in a short time?
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you filter? Because expat situations are very are literally making people feel compelled to connect at a great speed. So, for example, I just recently registered a new business in Dubai where I used to live. And the minute people saw this online, the amount of people that like, can we meet up next time you're here? I don't really see that in other cities, but Dubai is the most transient of all the cities that I've lived in. And people are so ready to connect and they're so extroverted. So, in that,
Mm.
preventing loneliness then becomes a filtering quality factor. And I talk about this in the book. So
Yeah.
again, it's like that kind and amount of connection. It's that quality. I just don't want to be friends with like absolutely everyone.
Mhm.
Um, Everyone is very keen to meet up, but how do I feel in their presence? And do I want to continue to be friends with them? And in my early 20s, as most of us were, firstly, we're much more promiscuous with connection at that time because that is literally the reason we're more extroverted in that period of life is our body believes that we need to pair off and mate biologically as Homo sapiens. So you'll find as you get older, you'll get more introverted because your body's gone, okay, you're 40 now, you're past the connection point. And when you have that high sociability in your 20s, you can end up wasting a lot of time. You don't have as good boundaries, you're not as present, and you're just spending your time with everyone. So I think one of the blessings of getting older as a connector is being very mindful of who you give your time and energy to. And you give me a thumbs
Yeah.
up in the chat if you can relate to that.
Yeah, protecting your energy, isn't it? Protecting your peace. And
Yeah,
also, do you
absolutely.
think like life experience teaches you that you can maybe, I don't know, sniff out bullshitters or
Absolutely. Or people who just want to leverage off you or want free
yeah,
coaching or all those things. They still happen to me all the time.
yeah. We can be more discerning as we get a bit more experienced.
Yes.
Simone, how would you describe your relationship with yourself right now then?
Oh gosh, I think this is the happiest I've ever been. I don't mean that in a smug way. We will get into later when we talk about what happens if you have a toxic family member and things like that. I guess my journey, most recently in the last year from 40 to 41 this year for me has been about being absolutely ruthless about negatively polarized connection. And because I was ruthless about that for the first time in my life, and you can read about all the trauma in the book that basically, and many of you might relate, made me very anxious to please, anxious for love, putting up with a lot of really bad behavior in favor of love because of the relationship I had with my mother. Um, and then when I got really ruthless in the last year, because at 40, something, I don't know, that I Googled if there's a study behind this and I couldn't find one, but something hormonal must change because your factor, your tolerance for allowing um substandard connection, be it platonic or non-platonic, disappears and you
Yeah,
become ruthless. And then you become happier than you've ever been because you've curated the village so perfectly with people that lift you up and you lift them up and then you feel like a real badass. So my
yeah,
connection with myself right now, I feel pretty badass. I finally got the career I always dreamed of. I finally am able to spend different parts of the year with all of the loved ones I have from all those countries I've lived in because of the kind of business that I built. Um, and then to be paid and to earn money from being in service. Tony and I both used to be in traditional media. I used to be in broadcasting, and I became so jaded. I believe like source or higher power like gave me the gift of communication and the gift of
mm,
storytelling, and I felt like I used to use it on air to talk about absolute fluff. I was the 2010s era of radio
yeah,
where you are putting people down and negging people, but it was considered normal. And I have such deep shame and I feel such a sense of negative responsibility about perpetuating so much of that. So I guess a lot of the work I do now is like atonement, to
mhm,
be able to use this voice for something positive, and to try and change the culture for the better. I've never said
yeah.
that on actually any interview, but maybe when you go on holiday to Greece and you leave your laptop behind for 5 days, you get some real good clarity, Tony.
Yeah, that's the way to enlightenment, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Leave
that's
them
right.
on the
Everyone go to the
day.
Greek islands. That's right.
For sure. But Simone, you're a broadcaster, you have a gift for communication. So I feel like a lot of what you would have learned, that this is what I feel like for me as well as a journalist in that capacity, is what you're able to do now because of that. So I mean, I say, when I tell people I used to work for the Sun and then for the Mail Online, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to hell, but I'm trying to course correct now, so hopefully Shelf Help will kind of maybe
You are, sister. You are. Don't worry. You are. We all are.
we're
It's
course
like, it's when
correcting.
Ali Wong says in a stand-up, the 40s are just like trying to turn the ship back round.
Yeah, trying. Well, and you say you have done a lot of healing. Like you talk about it in the book, and you talk about it
Yeah.
in work. So what has made the biggest impact on you then? What is it? A particular practice, or is it a particular any books that you'd recommend? We are the right audience for that. But anything that you
Yes.
really lean into?
The first statement would be that I think the biggest thing that helps is knowing that the healing never stops, which means every time that I do, and I wrote about that in the second book, which we're editing now, like this idea of when you take two steps forward and one step back, that happens with your own healing and development, not to be self-loathing anymore about it. So that's the first statement. A book that
Yeah.
changed my life was Michael Singer's Untethered Soul.
Mm. Yeah.
And then the book that inspired me to write, if there are any aspiring writers on here, I didn't read for about, I could always write as a child. I know I'm neurodivergent, so I need to consume a lot of content, but I was putting a lot of trash into my brain, like celebrity gossip stuff, for years and years. So about 10 years in the entertainment industry, I didn't write anything longer than a Facebook post. And then I read this one book that just inspired me so much, and it's Glennon Doyle's Love Warrior. I think it's
Oh,
by
wow.
far the best of all of her books. And I was like, I want to write like that. Like, wow. And her vulnerability in it, it really inspired the kind of vulnerability that I don't, audiences can tell when you're hiding when you write,
Yeah.
and protecting and guarding. And that's the opposite of healing, actually. To be at a
Mhm.
place where you feel so comfortable that you know you will be judged, of course you will be, but that is totally okay, means that
Mhm.
I like me enough to do that. And I thought I would never get to that space. When you've grown up in a very critical immigrant Asian household like I was, and I mean, you don't have to be Asian. There's lots of other immigrant experiences or critical experiences. But particularly for us, there's a lot of like cultural shame, judgment, conformity. You
Mm.
know, everything is built that environment for you not to be comfortable with you and
Mm.
all your imperfections. So you are set up. If you were born with a personality like mine, you are set up to be unhappy, and no
Yeah.
one is doing it purposely to you to be mean. They are passing on their cultural hang-ups. That's all they know. Like, it's not intentional. And the unwiring of that was a lot of the healing. So I just did an interview recently, and they were like, what are the pillars that you reparented yourself with? And I was like, number one, kindness before achievement. You know,
Mm.
that is probably one of the biggest roots to that. And for me, it was talk therapy. If we're talking about modalities, because I'm a communicator, talk therapy worked. And then breath work has kind of dislodged a lot of stuff as well for me. But if you are a good talker and you have a crayon box of colors to explain every single emotion that you're having, like me, and maybe like you, Tony, because you're also a communicator. Talk therapy works really well, but that's not the case for everyone. Like, I know a
Yeah.
lot of men find talk therapy really uncomfortable, so maybe something more somatic for them works. But particularly that as a modality for me, and I journal a lot, and I think the writing has healed me a lot.
Yeah, amazing. Well, this is definitely the right audience for the reading and the journaling, but all of it, I think. Um, and also, you talk about the vulnerability of sharing. So I think it's super vulnerable to share your story in a book anyway. Um, and then, but from what you just talked about and what I read in the book about your upbringing and your family, that it adds an extra adds an extra element of I imagine when you're sending the story out into the world, like how did that feel and how does it feel now?
I um I had just read too many books on connection that didn't make me feel connected. They were
Mm.
just straight personal development, and I was like, I've got skin in this game, like a lack of connection or a lack of belonging was, and it's really great to be able to say was, it's probably the first year I could probably say was, um, is the thread that binds together all of these experiences. So the lack of belonging in childhood led me to pursue an industry in which you were never good enough, so I could relive the trauma cycle in my nervous system and in my
Relate.
behaviors.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that stuff is so scary. It's so scary when you wake up one day and you go, oh my gosh, the voice of my boss is the voice of my mother. Like it's very scary. But that level of awareness is also amazing because once you have it, you stop walking into those situations anymore. Like I no longer want to be the puppy that runs after love for the rest of my days. Hallelujah, that's over.
Yeah.
So right, I don't think I could have ever written this book if my mother was cognitive and my father hadn't passed away. And I
Hmm.
feel that I was really in 2020 when I wrote this in the pandemic before I self-published it and then it was discovered by Hay House
Oh,
and
wow.
turned in, yeah, it
Congratulations.
was a
That's brilliant.
self-published book discovered by Hay House and then changed into Let's Talk About Loneliness as like a remix. I I knew that at that time there were very few people from my background that were writing about their family. But the
Mm.
wonderful thing is, in the last 5 years, there are more Asian American authors, like people giving voice to that trauma. And prior to us as a collective writing like this, people just thought we were the model minority. Like these
Mm.
are the people that migrate and follow the rules and do everything. But it's like, no, within the four walls of these houses, in order to get that result of one generation comes with nothing and then the next, the child goes, all their children go to Oxford and Cambridge.
Mm.
What do you think is happening to
Mm.
make that possible?
Yeah.
There's a crucible for that
Mm.
and um and some of it's really positive and amazing and some of it is also really painful for a child and
Mm.
um and so it needed to be said and talked about and it was terrifying to put it into print, but a mentor of mine said whatever topic you choose to dedicate your life to, you have to be the best conduit for that topic. That means in your lived experience as well as what you studied.
Yeah.
And so I realized no one else could do this but me because I don't see other people who are going through this with both Asian parents still alive. In our culture, you just wouldn't do it. And so I think
Mm.
my mother and father's gift to me was, in a way, the good thing to come out of the tragedy of both of their circumstances. My mum is, um, disabled with a rare degenerative disease, and she's not really that cognitive anymore. And then dad passed away when I was 19, just for those who haven't read the book. um, those particular circumstances provided the perfect intersection of factors for me to be able to be brave enough to put this book in the world, to serve other people with a
Mm.
really sad family story.
Yeah.
And that's the gift they've also given to the world.
Yeah. It's an amazing way to see it. So thank you for sharing that. Um,
Thank you for asking, actually.
and but before the book became, you were a specialist in human connection. So how does that happen? It sounds like I think it's the coolest job title I've ever heard. So,
I actually created it because I didn't like the word expert. I felt like, like I said, the healing never stops, the learning never stops. So
yeah.
yeah, I'm specializing in this, but um,
Oh.
I'm not expert in it. Yes, I probably know 1,000 times more on the studies and the researchers and the definitions than the average person. But that doesn't mean that those things aren't always changing and need to be done over and over again. So that's how the job title came about. Effectively, I was so disengaged with old media, and a few things happened where I was like, I need to do this as my life's work.
Mm.
I was working in a really toxic work environment. I mean, the industry of broadcasting is pretty toxic, but this particular last radio station I worked at in Singapore was, I had never seen anything like this. And the lack
What
of
internally you
belonging,
mean? In like your internal, your teams and your bosses and things.
yeah.
And
And there
what
was a
age were
lot of
you then,
anti,
Simone? Sorry,
sorry, love.
what age were you then?
I was 35 when I left and I started there at 31. So it was the
Okay.
last 4 years of my career in broadcasting. And I was considered a foreigner, even though genetically I'm Singaporean. I was born in Singapore, but I hold an Australian passport. And so there was a lot of this anti-foreigner sentiment. And what I learned about this when we were evolving as human beings in tribes, our biggest fear is to be excluded, right? And so every day I would feel this low level fight or flight that I really didn't have an explanation for until I started studying this stuff. So the work has also healed me in retrospect, in past experiences. So this was becoming untenable. And I could see in the corporate context, because most of my income comes from corporate speaking, was that our product on air was 10% as good as what I did at Virgin Radio in Dubai. Like it crushed innovation, it crushed creativity, this lack of psychological safety. And yes, Simone is she's the black sheep today, but before she started the team, there was someone else that was being picked on.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it was like a Russian roulette of exclusion.
Mm.
And what that did to the psychological safety of team members, it created cliques, it created bitchiness, it created toxicity.
Yeah.
And so that was one. One night I went on air and I had was running a contest to give away tickets to a new Marvel movie. And I asked people to um, send in a voice note of if they could have any superpower in the world, what would it be and why? And this is 2018, Tony, or 2017, 2018. And this young Gen Z girl sends a voice note in. Her name was Mei Xuen. I still have the voice note. I kept it. I think this was the final spark for me to leave and do this job. And she said, if I could have any superpower in the world, it would be to be able to connect with people really one on one. She said, everyone's pretty cold nowadays. I know this sounds like a really ordinary superpower, but she just sounded so sad and
Mm.
confused about connection, which then made me want to go and research connection because I could see that at a younger generational level, and that generation are now in the workforce, something was amiss,
Yeah.
right? And then, of course, mum not being able to connect with her own memories and herself, forgetting that my dad had died of cancer, thinking my dad was on holiday or having an affair, not knowing where he was. So that idea that if we lose this sense of self, be it through a degenerative disease or just some traumatic incident,
Hmm.
how we cannot connect with other people. So
Yeah.
everywhere I looked, there were these arrows. And I was working on a mentor on my speaking, and we were trying to find a topic. And one day he just watched me in a room and he said, like, Simone, you're a connector. And I at that point had no self-esteem from that job. I thought I was absolutely crap at everything, that I had no gifts, everything that I had ever thought I was good at in other markets working media, that I had none of that. And so when he said this to me, I was so dismissive of it.
Mm.
Um, but because I was really curious, I went to study it anyway, like because I thought there must be something I need to know, but I didn't think he was right about me being a good connector. And then, of course, the pandemic hit and it became the most talked about topic on planet Earth. And I had done all that study. So I was
Mm.
perfectly poised. And then in a pandemic, it turned into an actual job. Like it
Mm.
was just, I had hopes, but just like that. And so for anyone watching this on YouTube or on this call who is geeking out on something that you think has no commercial viability
Yeah.
or feels like honey, you don't know. The whole axis of the earth may just spin in
Yeah.
your direction. And for me, again, I think that is also not that I wanted a global pandemic for anyone, but I do think that is again, this confluence of events and mum and dad like kind of
Mm.
rotating things in my favor. Yeah.
Mm. So let's talk about the pandemic then, let's talk about loneliness then as a topic before we talk about connection, maybe. Um, are we getting lonelier? I think I know the answer to this.
Yeah, we're getting lonelier.
Getting
But
lonelier.
been getting lonelier for much longer than people think. So from about the
Okay.
1970s, a leading academic in the field from Harvard, Dr. Robert Putnam, he wrote a book called Bowling Alone, and it was about the disillusion of participation in civic life in America. How basically from the 50s to the 70s, people stopped being joiners. They stopped going to bowling clubs. They stopped feeling obligated to be part of, women used to sell Tupperware door to door.
Mm.
Things changed. And then when the internet happened in the 90s, it changed again. And then when social media happened, it really took a steep exponential change. But it's been happening for longer than we think, and it's been happening pre-pandemic.
Sure. And so when we stop doing things then because of these big shifts in the way we live and the way we operate, what do we start doing instead? Like what are we replacing that connection with?
So for a lot of Gen Z, it's this idea that they are experiencing life via this. So if I'm watching Santorini on Snapchat, why should I go to Snapchat? Why should I go to Santorini? So
Mm.
when you disengage from participation in life, you then diminish the chances of connection with others because you're not actually leaving to go anywhere or committing to anything.
Mm.
And what people are doing with that time, of course, we have people on, swiping or solitarily on, a lot of kids are doing video games. They're connected with other people in other rooms, but they're alone in their room playing those video games. So they're
Mm.
not getting that quota of human touch that we need as well to be healthy. They're not getting incidental or serendipitous connection of bumping into someone because they're just in that room. So we are choosing a little bit in the culture ourselves over being connected to others, which goes against really our biology. So we see this rise in individualism. And
Yeah.
even though I come Asian, Chinese culture is a collectivist culture. So it really is about communal living, but we're even seeing with the rise of capitalism in China, working hours and a downturn in the economy has led to one of the most filial connected cultures to be experiencing huge amounts of loneliness and diminishing birth rates. So this is a global issue. It's affecting absolutely every society in the world. And that is a very scary trend. And it is an existential crisis because if we stop connecting, we stop reproducing. And we are seeing that.
Wow, that's amazing when you talk about it like that.
Oh, yeah.
Because because I mean I understand that loneliness is an emotion, right? And it's a kind of like and it's a warning that you need to work on social health, which is something you talk about a lot. So there's a point to it, but it's like, do you think the more because we're so connected like in different ways now, but do you think we're just ignoring this the loneliness then, or do you think the new generations don't even understand that they're lonely?
I think the new generation understands they're missing this kind of limb that they feel that they're meant to have. They watch old movies and they see how people connected, but they never felt that level of connection. And I
Yeah.
need to just make a really big distinction here between incidental loneliness. So when Tony talks about the body's alarm, that is brilliant. That is our physiology. Expats, when you move to a new country, first 90 days, your body goes, go and make friends, please. You need your tribe. You are resource-wise exposed without a tribe. So that definitely happens. Um, so we have that. And then we have chronic loneliness, which is what we are experiencing, which is where people self-isolate. So chronic loneliness means that stress hormones are, like I was explaining that workplace, are circling through your body chronically over time. This is
Mm.
what affects your sleep, your immunity. So loneliness is an emotion, but it also is a physiological state. So it affects your immunity, um, and your biology. So the lonely brain is less agile, you get dumber, you don't have as much you're not as sharp just as at the point when you should be sharp. So this is chronic loneliness. You hold people to a higher standard than is necessary. You yearn to be invited out, but then you want to cancel when that
Mm.
happens. So you go into a self-isolating like loop where you say people actually don't want to be with me. Now this is where things get really dangerous. So people are now experiencing loneliness for months, years at a time, and it's shortening their lifespan and decreasing their immunity and putting them at risk of things like cardiovascular disease, which is the most common loneliness related disease, which makes sense because your heart is going off when you're in chronic fight or flight. So
Yeah.
that would make sense, right? That it would lead to cardiovascular disease. So these are all of the things that I try and raise awareness this week for, that this is not just mental health. This affects your physical health as well, because
Mm.
baked down to our DNA, we are meant to be with other people.
Yeah. That's what we're designed to do that, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah, because there was safety in numbers for us to survive as early humans. So
Yeah.
yeah, that idea of being exposed on the savannah without our tribe meant death. So the body got wired this alarm that, hey, we should be together. But other things, just to loop back to other things that are affecting our sense of connection, polarization, capitalism, polarization, social media, these are all of the things that are pushing us further and further apart from the state we were meant to be born into, which is kind of like a village environment.
Yeah, sure. So why do you think then that we feel that one feels, and I think as a collective this is true, feel embarrassed to talk about being lonely or wouldn't like to admit it, like either to ourselves or to other people?
Yeah, I think it is, firstly, it's a cultural layer, but I think if you think on a biological layer, your worst fear is to be ejected from the tribe. So anything that would lead you to be admitting that you have no friends, that you made bad choices in your marriage or the people around you, makes us feel very self-conscious that we in some way are responsible for our state of loneliness. And
Yeah.
then therefore that plays into, will I then be ejected because I must be unlikable if I don't have any friends. So therefore I'm more likely to be kicked out. So I'm
Mm.
not going to say this because it's going to put a halo over
I'm going
my
to highlight
head
the
of
fact.
I'm lonely. Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
I am really open about it
Yeah.
because I, again, am the best conduit. I did not look like what people think is a lonely person,
Mm-hmm. That makes
right?
sense.
So
Yeah.
it needs to be someone mainstream like me who can talk about it in mainstream language to help destigmatize this. I think that that's also important.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm really lucky. I have a lot of friends. I have a massive family, which has its pros and cons. But I've historically not been very good at being vulnerable and open and talking about feelings until I started bloody
You're
self-helping.
English, Tony. It's
I'm
okay.
English,
Chinese
yeah,
people,
as
we're the
well.
same.
And
Yeah, you
then
know.
and now I ask everyone else to do it, so I have to do it. And we love Brené Brown here, as I know you do. And the idea of kind of like sharing something. And after the pandemic, when I said to a few people, because I've moved out to the country, and I used to say to my London friends, yeah, I'm a bit lonely. And that was the one of all the things that I shared, that was the one thing that people really like, they kind of like latched onto in a nice way, in a like sending me voice
Yeah.
notes, making sure that they called me, making sure we put plans in the diary. And I think people just really were, it's shocking sometimes to hear when someone says that. If you feel like, well, you look busy, like you're doing things all the time. But it's like, yeah, it's a feeling, isn't it? And only you know if that's what you're craving, that connection.
Yeah, and that connection to the self is really that awareness of one's own state. So when I say your own state in self-connection, I mean both the physiological, so that if cognitively you don't know you're lonely, but you're not sleeping and your shoulders are up to your ears and your heart's
Mm.
going and your stomach's swelling, there are other symptoms of self-connection that can be letting you know maybe something's amiss.
Yeah.
Now, once you have that, that's really the only way that you can tell whether, am I cutting this friend off because this friend's done something unforgivable? Or am I doing this because I'm lonely and I need to self-isolate? So the self-awareness piece, which is actually my second book,
Mm.
is part of the diagnosing yourself as lonely piece. But you have such a great relationship with yourself, Tony, so you're able to articulate that, which I think is fantastic. And I think in terms of loneliness, and I think many of the women on the call are probably the same age bracket as us. We're really lucky we had an analog childhood. So
Mm.
we have the tools and the skills to say to your friends, okay, let's organize something. Can we meet up? Or I'm feeling a bit lonely or whatever. Imagine the generation who had their adolescence ripped from them in a pandemic and
Mm.
had to relate to their high school classmates online. And
Yeah.
now we expect them to basically have the tools to heal their own loneliness. I mean, that we're lucky.
That
We
will
have
take it. That will take a tribe, right?
that will take a tribe. That will take people like all of us here speaking out about this, reading the books, spreading the message so that they don't feel bad about their feelings of isolation. And that they can start to learn to have those feelings of connectedness that they've heard in movies and watched in the theater and read in books, like
Yeah.
that they can actually experience what it is to be socially satiated. And that's what I want for them.
Yeah. And I love the idea, this is kind of bringing us on to the idea that it's a skill. So it's a skill and you're not, I mean, we're innately born as social animals, but we're not born with the skills to make small talk. We're not born with the skills to kind of create a rapport with people, are we? That is very much socialized into us, I imagine. But the
Yeah.
there is that we can learn how to do it if it's a skill.
Absolutely. So I talk about a friend of mine in the book, Christina Sang, and Christina was born into an environment where she wasn't with her tribe. So she's Korean ethnically, but was raised in the Philippines and went to an international school. And then she went to the high school in the US, hospitality school in Switzerland. And then she fell in love with a Portuguese guy from hospitality school, moved to Portugal. And after that, I met her when I was working in Dubai. So this is someone who's always been without her tribe, that lacking in belonging. So she
Mm.
got socialized into always seeing points of relatability with every human she met. So, unlike what we're seeing this rhetoric in the world now, where, hey, when I meet somebody, I've got to see that they're a different ethnicity, gender, orientation, whatever class from me, and we're highlighting everything that's different about us. Oh, no, 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 no. We are wired in our DNA to see similarity. There's actually something called similarity attraction theory, which you can Google, which is also fascinating. So Christina got socialized to augment that skill that we know in our tribes because everyone in our tribe looked like us, talked like us, moved their body like us,
Sure.
spoke the same language.
Yeah.
So because she was always looking for belonging, I've never seen anyone that is so good at striking up conversation and building rapport because of how she was socialized, essentially, to have to
Mm.
make friends from a very young age because she didn't have her tribe. So
Yeah.
I do think you're absolutely right. It's something that we can learn. And unfortunately, because of the loneliness epidemic, people are only getting the emotional leverage to study this to stop that aching feeling. And I would
Mm.
love for people, and that's what I'm going to mention in all of the next media that I do, is that if you want to win in our AI future, everything deeply human moves higher up the value chain. So if you can augment those soft skills, which used to be looked down on in our analog childhood, they are now going to be super valuable along with coding, right? Engineering and coding is going to be up there. Um, so I think that is a really important thing if you have kids in your house or you have young people or you yourself want to upskill, is it's not just about making it great in your personal life and warding off, staving off loneliness and extending your lifespan. It's now also about making yourself invaluable in an AI future.
Mm. Yeah, 100%. That's such good. Yeah, it's great intel, isn't it? It's like, yeah, we need to be more human than ever if we want to stand out, which
Yeah,
sounds so
especially
weird to
us,
say,
because they
doesn't
didn't
it?
teach us coding in high school, did they?
No, sure. We're gonna have to rely on our human connection,
Yeah,
especially
I
with
still type on Instagram with one finger. So good thing I'm good with people.
exactly. So the thing, Simone, though, let's talk because I want to talk about the five different types of connection
Mhm.
shortly and how we can kind of work on those. But one thing I think when we're talking about connecting and and relationships and things like that, obviously that involves other people. And we can do as much self-help as we like. We can decide I don't want to be lonely anymore. I'm going to reach out or whatever, but we can't control other people. So what are your thoughts on or advice on how if people are scared about that, if it's kind of maybe they've reached out before and it hasn't gone well, or maybe like I feel like it is definitely kind of this cycle of it's easier to stay at home, isn't it? It's easier not to make the phone
Mhm.
call. Someone's mentioned in the chat that people are getting trained how to make phone calls because they haven't done
Yeah.
it. So because it's so much easier to not do the thing, do you have any advice on, I suppose, kind of how we get over that fear that it's the other people are the problem, maybe?
So the worst thing you can say to a chronically lonely person is like make the first move and go out and connect. It's literally biologically against how their brain has been shaped by loneliness. So what I often suggest is a couple of things. Try and find somewhere you can volunteer or be of service in your neighborhood. Being of
Mm,
service, even if you say nothing, you just help the little old lady who's probably lonelier than you carry her grocery bags, or you do that act of kindness. This gives us a hit of feel good hormones, especially when we're lonely. When we do
mm,
volunteer work for people less fortunate than us, it gives our lonely brain perspective. The lonely brain likes to say that it's the only one suffering, similar to depression. So
mm,
once you can do that, we can then get you to a better social baseline for you then to connect. Step two then would be attending something, or maybe you get invited to a wedding or a family do, and you're still not feeling great, but you have got into a better internal situation through being of service. And by the way, if we have time, I would love to tell you why doing good for others makes us feel more connected if we have a moment. But I'm just going to just go with this line of thought.
yeah.
So then from here, when you go to that social gathering, don't think you have to be the life of the party. If you've been socially isolated for a while, the best thing you can actually do is be of service in your communication, which means being a great listener, give the social
Mm,
cues, the head nods, the eye contact, making sure that person feels heard. You're going to
mm,
feel better. You're going to learn something. And it's also less tiring on a socially isolated energy band because if you haven't socialized for a while, you're going to find it really exhausting. So those would
mm,
actually be my
yeah,
first tips before doing the big gestures like the reaching out if you're chronically lonely.
sure.
Um, yeah,
So not feel the fear and do it anyway then, so much.
just take it even a notch below even messaging or calling if you're fearing social rejection. Get into a position where you're helping others just to push that perspective.
Yeah, I love that. Should we go? Can we talk about the five different types of connection then?
Absolutely.
Because I think they're really interesting that there's different types for a start. And then before we go into them, would you say that we all need all of these all the time, or is it about like a balancing act and they're all kind of have their uses and their benefits?
They all have their uses and their benefits. The two that are non-negotiable is self-connection and intimate connection.
Okay, should we
The
talk
other,
about
the
those two
others,
first then?
sorry?
Should we talk about those two first?
Absolutely. So chapter 2 of the book is about the 5 kinds of connection that we need. The first kind, I think, is self-connection for a lonely person specifically, because if you don't have an awareness of what's going on with you, you're going to either destroy connections, make socially awkward outreach. So that idea of taking space to find out what's going on with you or investing in your own personal development or therapy, for example,
Hmm.
super vital. The quality of my relationships before therapy versus the quality of my connections now are a dream compared to these self-sabotaging cycles I was in before. So self-connection.
And you are honest about that in the book, and you also talk about the desperation vibes that we can give off sometimes when
Yeah.
we so want to. I need friends. I need friends. But it's
And definitely for lonely people as well as
yeah,
traumatized people, that's a big, big one, the desperation. So that feeling deep down that I am unlovable, I haven't healed that core wound. And so even when I think I'm coming across as confident, that unlovability is people can smell it.
yeah,
You know, to live in that authentic you requires a little bit of work, if you've had some adverse childhood circumstances. So
100%.
the awareness of one's own experience in any given moment, self-awareness, self-connection. And then we
Yeah.
move into intimate connections. And these are, according to British anthropologist Robin Dunbar, evolutionary anthropologist, these are the 5 closest people to you. These are the people you can be vulnerable, be your worst self with, they still love you. And a lot of people get this from the people they cohabitate with, their
Yeah.
family. And for other people like me, you build this tribe. And I have these 5 people in every country that I've lived in around the world. And I've built a business where I can like go and see them, rotate them. So I get to see all 20, which is fantastic across the course of a year. So they are absolutely vital. That's the deep connection. And 1 in 3 Americans feel they don't have anyone they can be vulnerable with. So that's an
Mm.
issue. Those people make us feel held. So we need those.
Yeah.
Moving on from that, 15 people. This is what uh, Dunbar talks about, that these people can kind of comprise your identity. They are
Hmm.
the old term kin, so grandma, grandpa, cousins, people in the village, if you live in a village. I'm staying in my Swiss family's village here, and for example, my Swiss host mother is here. Her sister and her brother live next door.
Mm.
So you can see that idea of when people did live in villages or tribes like that. That aunties and uncles and all that were there. And if you don't, if you're an expat like me and you live in a different city, kin are just people who make you feel that you're part of a community. So they are called relational connections. Relational connection.
Okay. Yeah. So like that's a social fabric. I like that. So it's
Yes. So
like
I can walk out of the village and I'll be running and I'll see some sister of my host mother and we will acknowledge each other. And so I'm part of the fabric. I'm not a random outsider running around the village that no one knows who I am. So
sure.
I have some
Okay.
sort of belonging.
So that's
Um,
relational. Yeah.
Relational. After relational, we have uh, collective connection.
Yeah.
And collective connections are people with whom you have a thread of commonality, but you don't have to be besties. So every single person on this call today, we all love books and we love personal development nonfiction books. And
Yeah.
that is our thread of commonality. And that commonality makes us feel really seen with each other. And we need this. People who feel they don't have this can end up in extremist groups, in gangs, because
Mm.
they felt that their own family and friends in those other rung of connections could not understand their points of specific interest,
Yeah.
hobbies, things they geek out about. So it's really healthy.
Mm.
When I meet people and they say they don't have any hobbies or anything that they are passionate about, that's a self-connection issue. You should have something that floats your boat so that
Mm.
you can have a point of relatability to build collective connection. So that's important. And so joining associations or professional groups, this is good too.
Yeah.
And
Can
also
that
why,
be? Well, could that be online as well as offline, Simone? Obviously, I would say
Yes,
yes because of,
absolutely. Because your online connections should be a gateway to in real life meetups, not the destination. So you shouldn't stay on this forever and never meet. You should eventually have something, which I know, Tony, you do put events on, which is brilliant.
yeah, and we'll talk about that process in a minute actually, because I like the idea that there's like a recipe for kind of how you would build from
Yeah.
through to, yeah. So we'll talk about that in a minute for sure. And then we've got micro connections,
Yeah, micro connections are people that are certainly not your besties. They are your baristas, your at
dog walkers.
Starbucks. Yep, and actually, if you well, whether you travel or not, actually, this can actually be the gateway to some amazing friendships. I met this fantastic British lady in Greece on the beach. She was also solo female traveling, and there was a twin sunbed, and her name's Susie, and she sat next to me and she heard my accent and used that as a point of connection that her two daughters live in Australia. She'd met up with one of them at a wedding in Greece, who
Mm.
then announced that she just got pregnant. So Susie shared the joy of
Oh,
just finding out that her daughter was conceiving after 15 years in a relationship with the same person. With me, a random stranger. Do you know how connected that made me feel? And
yeah.
then we were laughing because she's 62 and dating and was telling me her hilarious dating stories. And I was just like, oh my gosh, Simone, does it get better? This is fantastic. But we had then more points of connection. But really, I'll never see Susie again. It was just a micro connection, but
Yeah.
it made me feel fantastically connected in that moment. I felt less alone because there were women single like me traveling alone,
Mm.
um, who had hopes and dreams for their family, who had certain opinions about Australia that we shared.
Yeah.
And how wonderful and how sad if you can't do small talk to have those, you
Yeah.
know? And that is why those rapport skills for the next generation that I teach, that my father taught me as an immigrant shopkeeper, I would watch him. They're actually gold now. They're actually probably more important than the deep stuff because I would say our culture is very over therapized right now. So
Mm.
everyone wants to like get into what's a deep trauma. Like I see, but hey, then we're all just reading each other's trauma tiles on Instagram.
Yeah.
How do we actually have a conversation
Yeah.
at the beginning of that? That's really important. So yeah, they would be your five types. And if you
Yeah.
want to find out which ones you have, which ones you don't, which ones you're strong in, so you can work on the other ones, I believe Maria's going to put the link to a quiz that I've created in the chat, and please share it around with your friends. It's really fun. And it's going to really help give you the definitions of everything I've said today as well, so it doesn't just go in one ear and out the other.
Yeah, sure, brilliant. And I love and I think this is about the micro connections, well, probably all of it really. The idea that that goes back to the kind of tribal living of when you see someone on your dog walk, deep inside you, it's like, oh, someone's there. Like I'm not totally by myself in this field.
Yes.
And I see the same person every day. And even if that person, I'm never going to invite them out for a coffee, but it's just like there's something that goes into your subconscious. It's like safety, and it's like I'm clocking some of
Yes.
my species. And I think it's all so powerful, isn't it?
And that's why we get that hit of dopamine. We get the oxytocin from locking eyes with them. And it's that acknowledgement that you're part of the tribe of
Yeah.
Homo sapiens and we're not leaving you behind. You're not being socially rejected. Um, we we now need to make an effort at having that mindset during
Yeah,
this
sure.
loneliness crisis.
And then in the book, I love how at the end of each chapter you kind of you share strategies or like ideas for things to do. And quite early on, you talk about go through your phone and find, I think it's three people who you haven't spoken to for like 6 months, but who you miss or who you want to be in your life. And then you kind of give like a recipe almost for how to reconnect. And it starts with a text and then a voice note. But then, like you just said to me, ultimately the goal is to get a real life meeting.
Yeah.
Is that how you would, like, from small talk through to that's the end goal?
Yeah, so we know if you vulnerability bomb, so if you are vulnerable with someone prior to establishing rapport and trust, it repels the exact kind of connection you crave. This
Mhm.
is because we are wired to be skeptical of new connections because of stranger danger. They could have killed us on the savannah if they were somebody that we didn't know in the tribe. And so we are wired to be skeptical of them. And so if you meet someone and they're in that skeptical state, and then you tell them your deepest, darkest secrets without doing the previous steps and building up,
Yeah.
their brain says, I have to run away from this woman because she threatens my survival. She cannot keep her own secrets safe. She's
Gosh.
never going to keep mine. And that was a huge problem for me as someone with an anxious attachment style who worked in media, which was all
Mm,
about gaining love through sharing and disclosing content. I
mm,
had to learn to get a better boundary. Many people say I'm still really open and I'm really warm. And so a lot of people disclose stuff to me now, which is a much better balance than me oversharing to them. But
yeah.
I still have had to kind of learn mechanisms of actually putting up a bit of an ice wall to stop being overly like taken advantage of as a connector.
Yeah.
Um,
Of course.
so for me now, it's gone the other way. But that's the reasoning behind that kind of rule of reciprocity, that
Mm,
growth in depth of connection and not going in immediately to be besties. The same way no one on here would want our little teenage sister to go out and sleep with a man immediately. Why? Why are we wired to be worried about promiscuity? Because
mm,
we could get into danger and be killed. It's the same way with non-platonic connection. We don't want to bomb into the best friend immediately. They could take your secrets and put it on the internet. So it's that skepticism there that is there to protect us. So we build in layers.
yeah. I love how you mentioned attachment theory as well, because I think learning that that applies to other relationships apart from just romantic
Yes.
relationships is really been important to me.
Yeah, if anyone wants to read the work of John Bowlby, all of his stuff about having a secure base in psychology was nothing to the attachment styles came from his work, but the original work on attachment theory was just for how our childhood or other circumstances,
Mhm.
those people who were studied that didn't have that secure, loving base, where their needs physiologically and emotionally were not met by a primary caregiver growing
Yeah,
up, were affected, and how they related differently with people as they grew older. And that is not contained just to romantic relationships, but boy, does it have an effect.
yeah. But it's how you relate generally. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so we're going to finish because it's 5 minutes to go. We're going to talk about doing good for others. But if anybody has any burning questions, then put them in the chat. If there's nothing we haven't covered already, then do that. But yeah, Simone, you said you'd like to talk about the
Well,
idea.
I this hopefully this is going to make you feel like, why does every major faith in the world tell you to do good things for other people? Well, turns out when we were in those tribes, guess who the people were that never got kicked out and ejected? They were the people that contributed positively to the community bigger than them.
Mhm.
And so they stabilized their position, the tribe, the medicine woman, the tribal chief, the alpha male, the warrior, whatever it was. And so when we contribute to something bigger than us, we get a hit of these feel good hormones that make us feel more secure and more connected. So, this is also why you should do it. It's happening at a physiological level for you. It's not just something that, oh, they told us this in primary school. It feels good for you. It feels amazing for the person receiving your aid,
Yeah.
especially if it's in a human to human, not just you donating money, but the person who's receiving your help can actually see you giving the help and there is that connection, you are
Mm.
both going to be socially more healthy by that act. So I hope that just one action point, you can put a recurring calendar invite for once a month into your diary to remind you for during that month to try and do an act of kindness for someone beyond your family unit without expecting anything in exchange. Um, you will feel so much socially better, I promise you.
Mm. Well, I think that's excellent homework for everybody. That's your homework, everyone. Well, I think it's time to say goodbye, unfortunately. I could talk to you all night, but thank you so much for being
Thank you,
here.
Toni. Thank you, everyone. And please, if you can go into your communities and evangelize on this, our world has never needed it more. The book is Let's Talk About Loneliness. It should be still at your local Waterstones. If not, I'm sure Toni will share the link.
Yeah, we'll share all the links, and everyone has the link for do the quiz and find out about your connection, what you need, what you need
Please.
more of, maybe, let's say. Thank you guys for being here. Awesome to see you. Bye, Simone. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll be in touch. Bye, Sophia. Nice to see you.